Hello, my name is Jane Anderson, and I worked on the Brass Labyrinth, kind of tentative game project, with my partners Levi Walker and Samuel Pinnex. This level is a procedurally generated dungeon. It is a roguelike type game where you can play as either a mage or a warrior, and the object is to defeat all of the enemies in the dungeon, and you'll see that there's a little counter in the top left-hand corner. Once you defeat all of the enemies, using your various attacks and spells and picking up health and mana along the way, you will win the game. So I will begin. So my responsibilities for this game were to create the UI, function, and implement it. And then I also did the post-process and lighting to make the level kind of eerie and spooky and make sure that you could still see and set the mood. I also created all the music by hand and implemented it. I also created the animation blueprint, imported the animations and rigged them, and then I also made the character blueprint for the mage. I made the mage abilities, all of her spells, and I also made all of the ability icons, both for the mage and the warrior. And I worked with Sam to get the magic damage to actually work with his AI damage sense, so that the monsters actually can tell where the spells are coming from, and will come after the person who threw the spell. I also created various tweaks and minor character movement related fixes, just to make sure that the animations for the mage in particular were smooth. For example, she can crouch, and she can sprint, and she can cast her spells, and the transitions between them are fairly smooth. So the problems that we overcame, or the problems that I overcame for my part, were interpolating between the different spells and getting them to function accordingly when they hit the troll characters, so that they tell when they're hit by a fire spell, which does different damage than a frost spell, for example. I also, with spawning different players and possessing them into the level, since you can play as both the warrior and the mage, we had to work together to figure out how to spawn them into the procedurally generated dungeon without having them float into space, and then possess each character accordingly so that you can play them. I established cooldowns and provided button press feedback so that when you fire a spell, the spell grays out temporarily so that you know that you pressed it. And then I also smoothed out the animations by setting the conditions for them. And I also wanted to create an appealing visual style with my graphical components. So I developed all of the UI by hand, the menu screen, the mage's UI, the warrior's UI, and the windscreen, and I even developed my own tentative font for that. And so we really just wanted to further set the mood and kind of develop our own thematic elements. One thing that I did add for navigation and lighting purposes and aiming purposes is a small kind of wisp looking thing that follows both of the player characters around. So you'll see it over her right shoulder. It's this little wisp, and it is a point light and an emitter attached to the character, so it moves around with them. And it's got a little kind of trail that aims, and then a point light that helps you to see throughout the dark portions of the dungeon. With the roof on, it was a little difficult to light a procedurally generated dungeon, so we spawned some candles in, and those provided some adequate light sources, but there are some parts of the dungeon that are eerie and dark. So the wisp allows the character to see more easily. You can play as the ranged mage character or the melee warrior character. I'm going to demonstrate the mage really quick. So you load in as the mage, and you can use these various spells to attack the trolls that you see throughout the dungeon. So let me find one. There's one. So he sees me, and he's going to come and fight me. So I hit him with a fire spell, I'll hit him with a little frost spell, and then I'll hit him with one more frost spell, and the troll dies. My mana is low, so I'm going to siphon some stamina to create some more mana for myself. And whenever each troll dies, you can get little pickups for health and mana just to help you progress through the level and make it a little easier for the player. There's also procedurally generated items that appear throughout the level, which Levi will go into detail later, just to help light the scene and add some visual interest. These items are also destructible, just in case they spawn in a place that the player needs to walk, they can destroy them. So, you can play as the mage, play as the warrior, and he's more melee, so he's got some melee attacks. He'll hit the enemy with his sword. And the character voices, I voiced the mage and Sam voiced the warrior. And so that's the basic functionality of that. So basically, you do that until you've defeated, since we're spawning 5 trolls in this level right now, as soon as you defeat the 5 trolls, a win screen will appear, and we will demonstrate that in our demo level. So that is the basics of the Brass Labyrinth. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation, and thank you for watching.
Hello, this is Samuel Pinnex, and this is my portion of the Brass Labyrinth breakdown video. My job in this group was to develop the perception-based AI enemy that you will be facing. So that includes the sight system, and there's also damage sensing for the AI, and I also had to set up the animation blueprints and the behavior tree for the enemy AI. And that also includes the damage it will be dealing, so it can hurt the player, both players. And I also had to work very closely with Jane so that the magic combat system with her magic character will work with the damage sensing for the enemy AI. And then I was also responsible for setting up the melee combat system along with the melee character the warrior will be playing as. So I had to set up his animations, his abilities, what damage they deal, how much stamina they take away, all of those things. And I also developed the health and mana pickup system for both characters, so when you kill a troll, the mana and health pickups will spawn. Alright, so what I've got here is the enemy behavior tree. So this right here, you can see these tasks are what is responsible for the enemy AI to wander in random locations. And I find that this system is a lot more organic than the simple route system that many games use. It's a little more realistic as well. So it sets the walking speed for the enemy AI, and it finds a random location within its own radius, and then it moves to that location. And then there's a boolean that is set up that is related to the sight of the player. So once it has the sight on the player, it aborts all of these tasks, and then it goes straight into this attack tree. So once it has its eyes on the player, this tree gets the player's location, and then it focuses on that target and it moves to him, and then it also wanders around the enemy player. And so it finds a little target area around the player, and it will start moving around, so it's not just standing there statically while hitting the player. And then this tree is specifically for attacking the player, so it finds the player's location, sets the walk speed, it focuses on that target, which is the player, moves to him, and then it calls the attack task, which is this, and it calls upon another event within the enemy AI that casts to the troll, and then it plays an animation montage that has a sphere collision attached to it. And this is the behavior tree. As I said, one of my jobs was to set up the warrior character along with the melee combat system. So I had to import the meshes for the warrior character and all of his animations. Then I had to set up his animation blueprint and his abilities, and it was also my job to voice him, because you notice he has voice lines. And so for going into his abilities, his first ability is just a simple slash of the sword that deals 0.25 damage to the troll. And then his second ability, hotkey number 2, is more of a heavy attack. It's like a slam ability, and it costs a little bit of stamina while dealing double the damage of the first one. Then hotkey number 3 is an ability called Encourage, which at the cost of stamina, he'll let out this roar, this scream, adrenaline will go through his blood, and then he will regain health for the cost of his stamina. Alright, to go into some of the problems I faced with the AI within the procedurally generated level, there was a problem with the trolls sliding around the level, and how I fixed that was changing the walking speed variable within the behavior tree for several of the tasks. And then one of the big bugs that I fixed with the AI was At the beginning of the level, the trolls will know the exact location of the player and go ahead and start targeting them and moving towards them. And how I fixed that was within the AI controller, there was a perception update event, and I put in a check so that it would only be updated if it was the player character. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Levi Walker, and for this project I handled the procedurally generated modular environment and the procedural generation of player characters, enemy characters, and destructible items and props found within the map. As you can see, this generation kit is a fully functional editor settings panel from which the developer or the player can tailor their experience. More rooms, less rooms, bigger rooms, smaller rooms, truncated corridors, floor culling, branching paths, all of which and more can be customized using the custom detail interface in the UE5 engine. Within the master blueprint for the procedural dungeon, you can also edit the amount of enemies and items that spawn, and you can even manipulate the percentage chance of items spawning, which dictates which items spawn more or less than others. The modular pieces that make up the seeded maps are modeled and textured from scratch using Maya and 3DCo, and served as inspiration for the title of the project. Working together with my team proved to be a welcome perk when tackling a project of this magnitude. The three of us had the kind of synergy you could only hope for while collaborating with others as a developer. GitHub was very useful during this process as well, and we were able to work together to make sure all of our lanes of work merged together correctly. Some interesting hurdles I had to overcome while working on this game was procedurally generating the ceiling and the items correctly. The ceiling wouldn't work correctly for a while, but after troubleshooting I finally found a workaround. By simply shifting the pivot point to the origin while the mesh was in mid-air within Maya, I was able to fix the ceiling generation. I utilized the blueprints I had for the floor generation and added an extra branch in the sequence to plug the ceiling mesh into. When it came to the randomly generated items, lights, and furniture, I had to think outside the box a little bit. Eventually, I ended up creating a blueprint component that could be duplicated as needed to spawn items, enemies, and players, all with different offsets and parameters to differentiate the type of spawning. All of the meshes and lights that are generated are at least one block unit apart and provide more atmosphere and fill an empty space within the dungeon itself. As a final side note, I also contributed my voice to the project. Where Sam and Jane play the knight and mage respectively, I play the troll. You can hear my wonderful modulated voice whenever the troll is slain. Thank you.